When a young millionaire is badly injured in a terrible accident, his world falls apart, until he meets her, and she helps him find his way back. The applause hadn't yet faded when Ethan Marlowe stepped away from the podium, the weight of the $1 million check in his hand less real than the glimmer of camera flashes. He had just closed the final round of series of funding for Listro, a startup he had built from scratch in his parents' basement. At 18, he was now the youngest tech CEO to be backed by two of Silicon Valley's largest venture capital firms. Outside, the city lights of Los Angeles sprawled like an electric river. Limousines waited, press hounded the exit, and his name was already trending across financial news outlets. Ethan should have felt invincible. Instead, as he slipped into the car, a strange hollowness settled over him. He didn't go to the after-party. Instead, he had the driver take him to his apartment downtown, a glassy box perched above the skyline, more art than home. The space was sterile, minimally furnished, its silence accentuated by the hum of his refrigerator. He tossed the check onto the granite countertop and stared at it for a long time. It was real. He had made it. And he was alone. The next morning began like any other: emails, performance metrics, calls with legal teams, one lukewarm protein shake. By afternoon, he was late for a keynote at UCLA, his alma mater in the loosest sense. Ethan had been enrolled for 6 months before dropping out to pursue Listro full-time. Still, they loved to claim him. He was texting the CTO about latency issues as he stepped into the intersection. He never saw the van. The crash made the evening news. A teenage tech titan struck by a delivery vehicle in a crosswalk. The van had run a red light. Witnesses said the impact lifted Ethan off the ground and flung him onto the hood of a parked car. He was conscious when the medics arrived, blood pooling on the pavement, his left leg twisted unnaturally. He'd asked for his laptop before he asked for his mother. In the ICU, a team of specialists gave grim but measured updates. Multiple fractures, a shattered hip, spinal damage that might, pending swelling, result in permanent paralysis from the waist down. His recovery, they said, would be long and uncertain. Listro's board released a sympathetic press statement. Investors buzzed about contingencies. Ethan's inbox, for once, went silent. He didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. Not his parents, not the doctors, not the nurse who changed his sheets. He stared at the hospital ceiling as if coding it with invisible variables. In silence, he processed the statistics. The odds of regaining partial movement, the probabilities of chronic pain, the forecasted plummet of his company's stock price if he failed to make a dramatic return. But what haunted him most was the silence. Until she walked in. Her name was Claire Dalton. 30, maybe 31. Brown hair pulled into a no-nonsense braid. No makeup. A faded denim jacket over scrubs. She wasn't a nurse, he'd asked. Physical therapist, she replied, tossing a small foam ball into the air like a magician warming up. Your doctor says you hate talking. Let's see how you feel about throwing. She had a calm voice, dry and direct. No pity. No pep. She rolled his wheelchair to the edge of the therapy room and crouched beside him. The first rule is honesty, she said. You hate this. That's fine. You want to quit. Also fine. But you don't get to lie to me or to yourself. Got it? He didn't answer. She tossed the ball at him anyway. It bounced off his chest. I'll take that as a yes. There was something about her that irritated him, maybe her irreverence, or the way she didn't flinch at the sight of the surgical scars on his spine. But something else, something unfamiliar, kept him from dismissing her like he had dismissed everyone else. That night, he dreamed of falling. Again. But this time, someone caught him before he hit the ground. The mornings came like glass breaking, shards of light slicing through the shades, pain flaring down his spine before he could summon a breath. Ethan had been moved to a private rehabilitation center outside San Francisco, a place with polished floors and manicured courtyards, and nothing to remind him of the life he'd built before the accident. The days were regimented, designed for progress. Metrics, milestones, muscle tone. Everything reduced to numbers again. He should have felt at home. But for the first time, the numbers weren't bending to his will. "You're plateauing," Claire said after their 5th session together. She said it without judgment, just a quiet note of observation as she helped him from his wheelchair to the therapy mat. "It happens. Doesn't mean you're failing." "I don't plateau," he muttered. She crouched beside him and met his eyes. "You're not a machine, Ethan." He turned away. The scar along his hip itched beneath the compression fabric. He hated how his hands trembled when he pushed himself into the parallel bars. He hated more how much it mattered to him what she thought. "You know," Claire said as she adjusted the tension bands on his braces. "You remind me of someone." He glanced at her. "My brother. Brilliant, headstrong. Could write code that made grown men weep. Got hit by a drunk driver a week after his 22nd birthday. C2 fracture. Full paralysis." The room stilled. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "He spent a year trying to outthink his body. Then he stopped. Spent the next 2 learning how to live again. Different rules. Same brain. Better outcome." Claire stood and handed him a resistance band. "I'm not saying you're him. But you could learn something from what he stopped trying to be." He didn't respond. But he held the band and didn't drop it. The board began calling again after the 3rd week. Ethan had ignored their emails, their inquiries, even the one that said urgent in the subject line. But on a Tuesday afternoon, his lawyer showed up at the rehab center with an envelope thick with clauses and signatures. "They're offering a buyout," he said, tone even. "But there's a quiet clause buried in here. They think you're damaged goods." Ethan's hands balled into fists. "They're offering $20 million for your stake. Final decision needed in 72 hours. He stared at the envelope as if it were a foreign language. He had written every original line of Listro's code, stayed up nights debugging the architecture, pitched in coffee shops, dorm rooms, even an airport bathroom once. It wasn't just a company. It was his design, his mind in digital form. Selling it would be like amputating another limb. Claire found him in the therapy courtyard that evening, a place surrounded by orange trees and quiet paths. He didn't speak. She didn't ask. After a long silence, she said, "The only thing more dangerous than losing everything is convincing yourself it didn't matter." He looked at her. "What if I'm never the same?" She considered that. "Then be someone else. You're allowed to change." On the 42nd day of rehab, he stood. Without braces. Without the aid of a machine. It was unsteady, maybe 3 seconds before the tremor forced him back into the chair. But Claire grinned like he just lifted a mountain. "That's the first time I've seen you forget to be angry," she said. That night, he opened the buyout envelope. And he burned it. The fire alarm didn't go off, but the nurse on duty knocked twice. He didn't let her in. Claire's apartment was across the bay, in a converted firehouse with creaky floors and mismatched mugs. He learned this on the night she found him sitting outside in the rain, drenched and silent, unable to articulate what he needed until she invited him inside. They sat on the floor, her offering him dry clothes and coffee. "You're not a charity case, you know," she said, somewhere between tired and tender. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted. Her hand found his, gentle, grounding. "That's the beautiful part. You get to decide." They didn't kiss. Not that night. But something shifted between them, unspoken and delicate. She didn't need to save him. And he didn't need to impress her. She was the first person he let see the new version of himself. The version that hurt, that feared, that hoped. When he returned to the company 2 months later, he didn't ask for the CEO title back. He asked to work on the product again, just the code. Just the thing he still understood. He saw Claire 3 evenings a week. No grand declarations, no rush. She had a life before him. And for the first time, Ethan was learning how to build a life that wasn't measured in term sheets and venture rounds. On the 94th day after the accident, he walked into a room full of investors with no braces. Just a slight limp. And smiled. It was almost poetic, The way his gait echoed softly through the Listro headquarters on his first day back. The glass doors hissed open without sound, revealing the atrium he had designed but never really lived in. Everything had the slickness of a success story: marble floors, espresso bar, screens that looped highlight reels of product demos and accolades. But as Ethan walked past the reception desk, his stride cautious but deliberate, all he felt was the surreal weight of returning as a stranger to a kingdom he once ruled. The welcome was warm, overly so, forced smiles, congratulatory pats that didn't quite meet the eyes. They called him champ, as if the accident were a football game he'd won. No one asked about the wheelchair still folded in his car trunk. No one asked what had changed. Except her. Claire was waiting in the courtyard behind the building, nursing a coffee and watching a hawk circle above the Pacific fog. She didn't stand when he approached. Just looked up and gave him the quiet nod that had come to mean more than applause ever did. "They gave you your office back?" she asked. "I asked for a desk in engineering." She raised an eyebrow. "I don't need a corner office," he said. "I need something real." Claire smiled faintly. "And is this real?" Ethan looked around. The team he once led from a whiteboard was now layers of management and delegation. His creation was alive, but no longer his to control. Maybe that was okay. "I'm learning to let go of the script," he said. Claire sipped her coffee. "Took you long enough." They met in ordinary ways now. Dinner on Wednesdays. Grocery runs on Sundays. Sometimes silence between them, not out of tension but because they didn't need to fill the air with noise. She came from a world where pain wasn't theoretical, it lived in bodies, in scar tissue and bone. And Ethan, for all his brilliance, had only just begun to understand that not everything broken needed fixing. Some things just needed holding. His limp became part of him, like punctuation in his walk. In meetings, he stopped explaining it. He let his scars show beneath rolled-up sleeves and didn't correct people when they stumbled through sympathy. He was learning, slowly, to forgive. But not everyone could. His mother arrived unannounced one Saturday, suitcase in hand and eyes already watering. She hadn't seen him since the hospital. The first time had been too much, she'd said, and the second too soon. Now she moved through his apartment as if cataloging damage. She wept quietly when he showed her the cane he sometimes used. Cried again when he mentioned Claire. "She's, 12 years older?" "She's 30. We're not counting rings on trees." His mother frowned. "It's just, you could have anyone." He stared at her. "I have someone. That's the point." The conversation ended there. That night, Claire came over for dinner and stayed mostly silent, sensing the friction like static in the air. After Ethan walked her to the door, his mother whispered from the kitchen. "She seems kind." "She is." Pause. Then, "I was wrong to come." He didn't stop her. But he texted her the next morning, "We're all learning to walk again." The first time he kissed Claire, it wasn't planned. They had spent the day at Golden Gate Park, watching dogs chase wind and children chase each other. He was more tired than he wanted to admit. She noticed, of course. "Sit," she said, patting a bench. When he winced easing down, she crouched before him and pulled his sneaker off gently, her fingers brushing the old fracture line in his ankle. "You still feel the pain?" she asked. "Some days." She didn't speak, just held his foot like it was precious. When she looked up at him, something unspoken surged between them. And he kissed her. Soft. Certain. Afterward they said nothing. They didn't need to. Their relationship wasn't a fairy tale. It was patient. It was honest. He had nights where he woke up soaked in sweat, phantom pain shooting through his spine. She had days where she withdrew into silence, memories of her brother's fate clawing at her edges. But they kept showing up for each other. When Listro prepared for its IPO, Ethan declined the offer to take the stage with the other executives. "I don't need a spotlight," he told them. "I already got my life back." Claire wasn't there at the bell-ringing ceremony. She was in New York, helping a child take their first steps post-surgery. When Ethan got home, she was asleep on his couch, a medical journal open on her chest. He didn't wake her. He just sat beside her, cane resting by the sofa, and watched the sun set across the skyline he once thought he owned. Because some things mattered more than owning. Some things were just meant to be lived. The IPO came and went with a sterile brilliance, confetti, champagne, headlines. Ethan's name trended for 24 hours, flanked by headlines like, "Boy Wonder Beats the Odds," and "From Wheelchair to Wall Street." Everyone wanted the narrative tied with a bow, redemption, triumph, closure. But after the interviews and market opening bell, after the investors clapped and smiled for photos, Ethan sat alone in the back of a town car, staring at a printout of Listro's final market cap. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt displaced. Money no longer thrilled him. It wasn't bitterness, it was distance. He had stared death in the face, counted the screws in his spine, measured his worth and how well he could lift his legs. And now that he had a net worth again, now that the world saw him as restored, he found the illusion exhausting. Claire knew. Of course she did. That night, he came home to find her sitting on the floor, knees pulled up, scrolling through photos on her phone. "Who's that?" he asked gently, sitting beside her. "My brother," she said. "The last good day." In the photo, a young man grinned beside a freshly finished jigsaw puzzle. The sun was catching the side of his face, and the floor looked hospital sterile. But his expression was joyful, untouched by the dread that would soon follow. Ethan said nothing. Just reached out, placed his hand over hers. "I'm scared of what happens next," she whispered. He understood. For her, it wasn't about the money, the IPO, or the headlines. It was about letting someone in again. Trusting that a crash wasn't always coming. He turned toward her, voice quiet. "Then we're scared together." And for once, she didn't correct him. She just let it be true. They didn't talk about marriage. Not at first. It crept into conversations like fog, uncertain, soft-edged. They were content in a way that felt private, unshareable. No grand declarations, just groceries, shared glances, quiet laughter between toothbrushes and bad TV. One morning, while eating toast, Ethan said without looking up, "If I asked you, would you say yes?" Claire didn't blink. "You'd have to ask properly." He did. A week later, on a small hill overlooking Half Moon Bay, he offered her a ring he had designed himself, simple, strong, no stones. "Because nothing we have is borrowed," he said. "We built it." She said yes. And they cried. The wedding was small, 30 people, a garden behind a historic house outside Marin. No tuxedos. No cake photos. Just Ethan, leaning on his cane, his hand in hers as they read vows written in the margins of old books. Claire wore a blue-gray dress. No veil. There was laughter, yes, but more than that, there was quiet. A sacred kind of silence that settled between them as if the world finally understood what they had survived. Tom, Ethan's co-founder, gave the toast. I remember when Ethan first pitched Listro. He wrote the entire back-end logic on a napkin at a Thai place in San Mateo. But what he built here, this. Tom gestured to Claire. This is the greatest system he's ever architected. Because it runs on trust. And it's never needed a reboot. The room laughed. Ethan smiled. And Claire squeezed his hand. Later that evening, as guests trickled away and the moon climbed above the cypress trees, Ethan and Claire sat alone by the fire pit, shoes off, toes curled in the grass. This wasn't supposed to be my life, Ethan said. I had a plan. College, IPO, maybe sell by 21, live off dividends, die in my 30s from work-induced burnout. Claire smirked. You're still on schedule for the burnout part. I like this version better, he said. And he meant it. He wasn't the boy they'd written articles about. He wasn't even the man they'd photographed post-recovery. He was just Ethan now, scarred, limping, stubborn. In love with a woman who'd rebuilt him without ever asking for anything in return. He leaned into her shoulder, closed his eyes. The fire crackled beside them. And for the first time in years he didn't feel like he had something to prove. He felt home. The weeks after the wedding passed in a kind of warm blur, half-unpacked boxes, morning coffees that turned into long conversations, and evenings spent on the couch, legs tangled, the TV ignored. But even joy, when lived honestly, has texture. And recovery, as Ethan had come to understand, was never linear. It was a quiet Tuesday when the first setback came. He was alone in the apartment, working through a new algorithm for Listro's machine learning backend, when the pain flared, sharp, electric, stabbing from his lower back down through his thigh. He dropped the stylus mid-sketch, breath caught somewhere between a curse and a cry. It had been months since the last pain episode. He lay there on the floor for over an hour, refusing to call Claire, refusing to move. Pride, it seemed, wasn't dead, just dormant. By the time she came home, he was sitting upright against the wall, pale and sweating. She didn't speak. Just knelt, checked his posture, and wordlessly fetched an ice pack. "I'm fine," he muttered. "You're in pain. It'll pass." She sat beside him, close but not touching. "You know the hardest part of rehab?" He said nothing. "Not the pain," she continued. "Not the limits. It's the silence. The way people pretend nothing's wrong once you're on your feet again." He looked at her. "I didn't marry your spine," she said. "I married you. Stop hiding." They returned to physical therapy together. Not daily, not obsessively, but enough to remind Ethan that healing didn't end with the wedding vows. Claire reintroduced him to aquatic resistance training, gentle strengthening, posture correction. "It's humiliating," he told her one day, watching his reflection as he balanced on a floating mat in the center of the pool. "It's human," she replied. "Your body isn't betraying you. It's asking you to listen." He didn't reply. But that night, he asked her to teach him yoga. Not for strength. For stillness. Meanwhile, Listro evolved without him at the center. Ethan had formally stepped back from operations after the IPO. He kept a seat on the board, but his name no longer appeared on daily update threads or product sprints. He was finally learning how to detach, and how to be proud without being needed. He began mentoring. Not publicly, he hated the spotlight, but quietly, personally. Young developers. College dropouts. Injured athletes trying to pivot into tech. He answered emails at midnight, reviewed code on weekends, hosted video calls from the spare room Claire had helped turn into an office. "This is the best work you've ever done," she told him one evening, watching him explain a recursive search method to a 16-year-old girl building a health tracking app for her wheelchair-using brother. "It's not work," he said. "It's purpose." He looked at her. "Do you ever miss the hospital?" Sometimes she did. But not in the way people expected. "I miss the clarity," she said. "When you're in the OR, there's no pretense. Just need. Just urgency. Everything else fades." Ethan nodded slowly. "You think we're too comfortable?" She hesitated. "No. But I think we've earned more than comfort." The conversation that changed everything came on a Sunday morning, when Claire placed a folded brochure on the kitchen counter beside his coffee. A rural rehabilitation clinic in Mendocino County. Underserved. Underfunded. In need of physical therapy and tech solutions for patient care. Ethan picked it up, eyebrows lifting. "You thinking of applying?" She shook her head. "I already did. They need a therapist and a tech consultant. I told them we're a package deal." He stared at her. "You want to move?" "I want to matter," she said. "In a place where the work is raw. Where the people don't care about your IPO or your limp. They care that you show up." He didn't answer immediately. He just looked out the window at the skyline, his old dream, his old kingdom. And realized he no longer needed it. He turned back to her, smiled softly. "When do we leave?" 2 months later, the apartment was empty, save for the framed photo of their wedding on the fireplace mantel, which Ethan wrapped in a towel and placed in a box marked Life, version 2.0. They left without fanfare. No interviews. No goodbye parties. Just a rented U-Haul, 2 travel mugs of coffee, and the quiet thrill of beginnings. Claire drove. Ethan navigated. And somewhere along Highway 1, the ocean opened before them, vast and unwritten. He reached across the console, took her hand. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because they were already writing the next chapter, not in code, not in contracts, but in the language of a life rebuilt. The clinic was nothing like the ones they had known. No high-rise buildings, no polished chrome reception desks or cappuccino machines humming in the background. Just a converted 2-story house off a winding road, surrounded by redwoods and mist. The sign out front reads simply, Mendocino Valley Rehabilitation and Mobility Center. The air smelled like pine and ocean salt. And for Ethan and Claire, it smelled like relief. Their apartment above the clinic was modest, old floorboards, narrow hallways, a kitchen with mismatched cabinets, but it had 2 large windows facing the forest and a desk that Claire insisted Ethan take for his consulting work. It reminded him of the room where he had first built Listro, spare, quiet, private. He liked that. More than he expected. Claire adapted easily to the clinic's rhythms. The patients were locals, loggers with fused knees, elderly women recovering from falls, a boy named Alex whose growth disorder limited his mobility. She worked with quiet precision, learning each person's story before ever touching a muscle or issuing a stretch. Ethan, at first, was an outsider. He volunteered to digitize their scheduling system, organize patient data into a HIPAA-compliant backend. The staff, mostly overworked and underpaid, called him the IT guy for weeks. But when he helped the clinic secure a grant using a pitch deck that took him a single night to design, the mood changed. The director, a silver-haired nurse named Marta, began asking for his opinion on equipment purchases. The receptionist started slipping handwritten notes into his mailbox. Can you fix the printer? Wi-Fi's down again. And slowly, without his permission, Ethan became part of the place. Their days fell into a rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on the balcony, fog draped across the trees like gauze. Claire went downstairs early, reviewed charts stretched before her first session. Ethan worked remotely, consulting for nonprofits, mentoring via Zoom, building a lightweight patient tracking app tailored for small rural clinics. At lunch, they met under the giant cedar tree behind the clinic. Claire always brought something simple, leftover pasta, peanut butter sandwiches. They'd sit cross-legged on the grass, boots off, and talk about anything but tech or injuries. One afternoon, Claire said, Do you realize no one here knows you're a millionaire? Ethan grinned. Feels like a secret identity. You like that? He thought for a moment. I like that they see me now. Not the version in a magazine. Claire nodded. Good. Because I didn't marry the headline either. Winter arrived in slow whispers, mornings colder, pine needles frosting over. The clinic had a fundraiser in December, hosted in the local high school gym. Folding chairs, string lights, pies donated by neighbors. Ethan was asked to speak. He declined. Claire nodded in approval. Instead, they worked the coat table together. Claire handled logistics. Ethan scanned QR codes for donations. At one point, Alex, the boy with the growth disorder, walked in wearing a navy suit 2 sizes too big and crutches Claire had fitted for him. He beamed when he saw them. I wore a tie, he announced. You look sharp, Claire said. Hey, he whispered to Ethan. Can you fix the clinic's tablet? It crashed again. Ethan laughed. Tomorrow. I promise. And just like that, he realized, he wasn't out of place anymore. This was the place. On Christmas morning, they woke to the sound of branches tapping against their bedroom window. Claire reached for her robe. Ethan stayed in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, hand resting on the scar that still ached on humid days. When she returned with 2 mugs of cocoa, he sat up and said, I've been thinking. She raised an eyebrow. Dangerous. I want to stay, he said simply. For good. She handed him the mug. I know. You did? Claire sipped her cocoa. You sleep through the night now. You hum when you work. You fix things around the clinic no one asked you to fix. You've stayed in your body, Ethan. That's how I knew. He looked at her. I never told you, he said quietly. But right after the accident, I thought my life was over. Not just the walking. Everything. I thought I'd peaked. That no one would see me without seeing what I'd lost. Claire placed her mug down and took his face in her hands. I never saw what you lost, she whispered. Only what you built after. He kissed her then, slow and steady. And for the first time, it didn't feel like reclaiming something. It felt like creating it. Later that day, they joined the staff at Marta's house for dinner. There were kids running through hallways, a roast cooked slightly too long, a piano someone played badly in the corner. At one point, as Claire chatted with the clinic's new hire, Ethan stepped outside. He stood alone on the porch, watching snow begin to fall across the pines. His cane leaned against the rail, untouched. He reached for his phone, not to check stocks or emails or market alerts, but to open a document titled Clinic Expansion Proposal. He had ideas. He had energy. And for the first time in years, he wasn't chasing a finish line. He was shaping something that might last. From the doorway, Claire called softly. You coming in? He looked at her and nodded. I'm exactly where I need to be. Spring arrived shyly that year, buds shyly unfurling on the dogwoods, the coastline soft with sea wind instead of storm. At the clinic, windows were opened again. Sunlight slanted through the halls where patients moved slowly, some with walkers, others pushing children in wheelchairs. There was no glamour here. No acclaim. Only progress in small increments. Ethan had never felt more useful. The proposal he drafted, an initiative to create a modular rehabilitation program that could be replicated in other underserved rural communities, had gained traction. A state health board reached out. Then a small network of rural hospitals. It wasn't flashy. It wouldn't make headlines. But it mattered. He presented it at a regional health conference in Santa Rosa. There were no suits, just khakis and cardigans, and the crowd was mostly physical therapists and county coordinators. When he spoke about recovery as something iterative, something coded over time instead of cured, the audience listened. Not with awe, but with familiarity. They understood the language of unfinished healing. After the talk, a man approached him, grizzled, late 50s, shoulders curved from years of lifting people. You were the tech kid, right? The one with the big fall? Ethan nodded. Still falling sometimes. The man smiled. Good. Means you're still moving. Back at the clinic, Claire was piloting a new therapy system for stroke survivors, using pressure sensors and gamified feedback to help retrain motor control. It was a system Ethan had helped wire together from repurposed VR hardware and a lot of midnight soldering. One afternoon, she pulled him into a session. Why me? He asked, eyeing the harness. Because you overthink everything, she replied, strapping him in. The test involved balancing while reacting to shifting patterns on the screen. Every time Ethan tried to anticipate, he lost rhythm. Stop trying to win, Claire said. I'm not trying to win, he muttered, readjusting. Yes, you are. You're trying to outpace something that already happened. Just let it happen. On the final round, he stopped reacting. He just moved. By instinct. By feel. He didn't fall once. Their life, too, had found a rhythm, less designed, more lived. They learned each other's silences, when to lean in and when to leave space. Claire kept early mornings sacred. Ethan claimed evenings for walks through the woods, cane tapping lightly as he went. They cooked together most nights, Claire measuring, Ethan improvising. One night over lentil stew she said, You never talk about the crash anymore. He paused, chewing. Because it stopped being the center. She studied him. So what's at the center now? He looked at her, not answering right away. Then, this. The clinic. You. The quiet. Claire smiled. You're turning into a romantic. I'm regressing into someone with a soul. She raised her glass. to regression. Still, the past doesn't vanish. It returns in flickers. Like the day a journalist emailed, asking for a feature. 5 years after the fall, where is Ethan Marlowe now? The tone was syrupy, curious. Like they wanted a myth, not a man. He deleted it. Or the time he got a call from Listro's current CEO, an old acquaintance now piloting a billion-dollar valuation into the stratosphere. They wanted Ethan's insight on a possible health tech expansion. "We'll fly you out," the CEO said. "Private, of course. You'd stay at the Four Seasons." Ethan glanced at the woodstove where Claire was kneeling, feeding kindling into a small fire. "I'm good here," he replied. "You sure? Could be worth 7-8 figures. I already cashed out once." And that was the end of it. One evening, after Claire's last patient, a woman who had walked unassisted for the first time in a year, Ethan found her on the balcony, knees pulled to her chest, staring into the dusk. "You okay?" She nodded, then shook her head. She cried when she took those steps. Not because she was happy. Because it reminded her what she'd lost. Ethan sat beside her. "I used to think progress was proof that I hadn't failed," she said. "Now I think it's something messier. We move forward, but we carry things." "We always do," Ethan said. "But you didn't just give her movement. You gave her space to feel." Claire rested her head on his shoulder. They stayed there until the light was gone. That night, in the quiet warmth of their bed, she asked, "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" "The world you came from. The money. The speed." He turned to her. "I don't miss the velocity. But I miss the clarity of purpose sometimes. Of building something from nothing." She reached for his hand beneath the sheets. "Then let's build something else." Ethan smiled into the dark. "What do you have in mind?" Claire paused. Then whispered, "A home. A future. Maybe more than 2 people in it." Ethan's heart stilled, then bloomed. She wasn't proposing. Not exactly. But something was beginning. Not fast. Not flashy. But real. They didn't rush into it. That wasn't their rhythm. Claire didn't frame the conversation around children with calendars or checklists. And Ethan didn't counter with spreadsheets or timelines. It began instead with small gestures, a new bookshelf in the spare room, weekend drives through neighborhoods with swing sets in front yards, the occasional pause at a window where children's shoes sat beside muddy boots. They talked around it at first. What kind of parents they might be. What they feared. What they knew. "Would you be afraid?" Claire asked one night, curled into Ethan on the couch. He considered the question. "Not of loving a kid. No. Of failing one, maybe." She nodded. "Same." It was enough for now. Not a decision. But a seed. Life didn't pause for possibilities. The clinic was expanding faster than they'd anticipated. Their small patient tracking app was now used in 5 counties. Ethan found himself fielding requests from other rural centers across the state, each one reminding him why he'd left his company in the first place, to build something that met people where they were. One patient in particular stayed with him, a former firefighter named Al who had lost partial leg function after a collapse. Al didn't talk much. Didn't trust easily. But slowly, he started showing up early for sessions, asking about Ethan's brace adjustments. One day, after a session, Al stood beside Ethan's workbench in the basement and said, "My son stopped talking to me after the accident. I wasn't the guy he grew up with anymore. I guess I didn't know how to let him see who I was now." Ethan didn't offer advice. Just handed him a wrench. "Help me fix this mount. It's off by a degree." They worked in silence. Sometimes that was enough. That spring, Claire missed a cycle. Then another. She didn't say anything until after the third. They sat on the edge of the bathtub together, hands entwined over a pharmacy test still blinking. "I'm terrified," she whispered. He kissed her knuckles. "Me too." The screen showed 2 lines. Either of them spoke. Then Claire laughed quietly. It wasn't joy. Not yet. But it was real. In the weeks that followed, they moved slowly, appointments, walks, late-night whispers in bed. Ethan read quietly beside her most nights now, hand resting on her stomach, as if already trying to understand what was growing there. They didn't tell anyone right away. It was theirs to hold first. Not because they didn't trust others, but because they were learning how to trust this new version of themselves. Not just rebuilt. Not just surviving. But ready. They told Marta first. Over coffee in the clinic staff kitchen, with Claire's hands wrapped tightly around her mug and Ethan shifting slightly in his chair. "We're expecting," Claire said simply. Marta blinked. Then her face split into a grin that made her seem decades younger. She reached out, cupping Claire's cheek with a weathered hand. "About time this place got some good news that didn't come in a lab report." Words spread slowly after that, not because they were secretive, but because they cherished the stillness before the world changed. In the waiting room, patients began to notice. Alex, the boy with the growth disorder, was the first to ask. "Are you gonna be like a mom?" Claire smiled. "Looks that way." He nodded solemnly. "You'll be a good one. You don't talk down to people." That night, she repeated the line to Ethan as they lay in bed. "You'll be a good one," she whispered, eyes on the ceiling. "Because you stopped trying to outrun the worst day of your life. You stayed." He didn't answer with words. Just reached for her hand. Pregnancy reshaped their life, not just the practical things, like baby-proofing the stairs or clearing out the office to make room for a crib. It changed the emotional air in the house. It softened Ethan in places he didn't realize had hardened. Made him slower to respond, quicker to notice. Claire, too, changed, but not just her body. She moved with a deliberate kind of grace now, aware of every shift, every ripple of discomfort or warmth. They didn't treat it like a miracle. They treated it like a responsibility. A privilege. A path they'd chosen to walk with their eyes open. There were fears, of course. Of complications. Of how trauma might echo. But they faced each one with quiet resolve. "We are not broken people," Claire said one evening, when Ethan panicked over a dream of losing her in the hospital. "We are healing people. Always." One afternoon, Ethan sat in the garden behind the clinic, sketching a diagram for a redesigned mobility aid, something smaller, less clinical, for children. Claire stepped outside, one hand on her belly, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. "What are you building now?" she asked, settling beside him. "A version of support that doesn't look like a diagnosis," he said. "Something kids wouldn't be ashamed to be seen using." She kissed his temple. "You're already that for them. You just don't see it." He didn't answer. Just reached over and rested his palm against her stomach, feeling the quiet flutter beneath. And for a long moment neither of them moved. Not because they were afraid to, but because the stillness was its own kind of strength. The labor came early, 36 weeks and 3 days, but not dangerously so. Claire had just finished reviewing a patient file when the first contraction gripped her low and sharp. She knew immediately. Not a false alarm. Not discomfort. This was the beginning. "Ethan," she said calmly from the clinic doorway. "It's time." He didn't panic. He'd rehearsed this moment in his head 100 times, mapped the routes, memorized the bags by the door. And yet, watching her pause at the base of the stairs, hand on her belly, something ancient and unnameable moved through him. They drove without sirens. No rush. Just measured breaths, his fingers brushing the back of her hand between red lights. It was 12 hours before they met him. A boy. 6 pounds, small but fierce, with a full head of dark hair and a furrowed brow that reminded Ethan of how Claire looked reading lab reports. The delivery had gone well, though Claire's exhaustion was visible in the tremor of her shoulders. Still, when they placed him on her chest, she didn't cry. She just breathed. "I didn't think I'd feel this calm," she whispered. Ethan leaned in, brushing his hand through their son's damp hair. "I think we've lived through enough storms to recognize peace when it comes." They didn't name him immediately. They let him sleep, swaddled between them, the hospital room dim and quiet. "You know," Ethan said softly. All those years I thought I had to become something great before I was worth loving. Claire turned to him, eyes tired but sharp. You were always worthy. You just didn't know where to look. He nodded, his hand resting lightly on their son's chest. We'll teach him better than that. They named him Rowan. After the tree. Strong roots. Gentle shape. A quiet kind of protection. Back home, the world shrank beautifully. Feedings at midnight. Laundry left half-folded. Emails left unanswered. Ethan took leave from his consulting, though he still read grant proposals during naps, often with Rowan dozing across his chest. Claire healed steadily, but refused to rush. I've spent my whole career telling people recovery takes time, she told Marta. Not about to be a hypocrite now. And Rowan grew. Slowly, steadily. A curious gaze, wide and unblinking, tracking movement like a question. One morning, weeks after they'd brought him home, Ethan stood at the window with Rowan in his arms. The sun was just breaking over the redwoods. Claire was still asleep, curled toward the empty space where their son had been. Ethan whispered, You have no idea the world you've landed in. But we'll build it together. He meant it. Not as a promise. As a blueprint. Not grand but good. Not perfect but whole. Because this was wealth, he understood now, not capital or acclaim or lines of code. But mornings like this. A quiet house. A steady breath. And the knowledge that everything he once believed he had lost had only been waiting to be found.